The Galactic Council never expected Earth to strike back. The transmission came through at 3:47 in the morning, and by 3:49, every government on Earth had been woken up. I was already awake. I had been sitting at my desk in the United Nations building in Geneva, reading field reports from our diplomatic station near the Veth Dominion's outer border. Something had been wrong for weeks. The Veth Dominion's ambassador had stopped attending joint sessions. Their trade envoys had quietly stopped filing shipping manifests. Little things. The kind of things that a person trained to notice small patterns could not ignore. Then the transmission came. A holographic projector in the center of the UN main chamber lit up without anyone activating it. The Council frequency had override access to every communication node on Earth. We had agreed to that when we joined 40 years ago, back when we were so desperate to belong to something larger than ourselves that we signed almost anything they put in front of us. The projection showed the Galactic Council's seal, 12 geometric shapes arranged in a circle, each one representing a founding species. Earth's symbol, a simple blue dot added 40 years later, sat on the outer edge of the seal, smaller than the others. I walked into the chamber. About 60 other people were already there. Diplomats, advisors, translators, some still in the clothes they had worn to bed. Nobody spoke. We all stood and watched the seal rotate slowly in the blue light. Then the Arbiter spoke. The Arbiter was not a single creature. It was a collective system, a rotating panel of 7 senior council members who delivered formal decisions. When the Arbiter spoke, it was not a suggestion. It was a ruling. The voice was calm and flat, the way very powerful people sound when they have already decided the outcome and are only informing you as a courtesy. The Galactic Council, in session under the permanent authority of the Founding Charter, does hereby issue the following directive to the inhabited world designated Earth, Jurisdiction Code Terra 7. In recognition of the Mineral Survey Act of year 3214 of the Common Galactic Calendar, and in accordance with Article 91, subsection 14 of the Founding Charter, the following order is given. The population of Earth is to be peacefully relocated to the designated reserve zones on planets Verath, Amna, and Dusk 9. Relocation is to be completed within 30 standard days. All structures, vessels, and technology on or orbiting Earth are to be surrendered intact to the designated authority of the Veth Dominion. Non-compliance will result in enforced action. Then the seal vanished. The chamber lights came back on. For a long moment, nobody moved. I remember what I felt in that exact second. Not fear, not anger, something stranger, something that felt like the moment before a very large door swings open. I looked around the room. I had worked with these people for 11 years. I knew their faces the way you know the faces of people you have sat beside during many difficult moments. And what I saw on their faces was not panic. What I saw was the particular expression that human beings make when they have just been told something so enormous and so outrageous that the mind needs a moment to confirm that it is real. One of the senior advisors, a man named George Harlow, who had spent 30 years in diplomacy and who I had never once heard raise his voice, set down his coffee cup very carefully on the table in front of him. He looked at the empty space where the hologram had been. 30 days, he said quietly. Yes, I said. To vacate the planet. Yes. He nodded slowly, the way a person nods when they are not agreeing with something, but are simply confirming that they heard it correctly. That was the moment. That was when I understood that what came next was going to be unlike anything that had come before. My name is Claire Lawson. I am a senior diplomatic liaison, which means my entire career has been built around the idea that problems between different parties can be resolved through conversation, compromise, and patience. I believe that deeply. I had spent my adult life believing it. Within 20 minutes of the Arbiter's transmission, I received a message on a channel I did not know existed. It was not routed through any official network. It appeared directly on my personal device, bypassing every standard communication protocol. The message was 6 words long. Come to Titan Base 7 now. There was no sender listed. There was no department name. There was a 16-digit authentication code at the bottom of the message, and when I ran it through the security verification system out of instinct, it came back with a clearance level so high that my screen simply displayed the words "Authorization confirmed," and then went blank, as if the system itself did not want to hold the information any longer than necessary. I looked at the message for about 4 seconds. Then I went. The shuttle from Geneva to the Titan Transit Hub took 9 hours. I spent most of those 9 hours thinking about the Charter and Article 91 and whether there was any legal mechanism that could challenge the ruling. I was a diplomat. That was how my mind worked. I was looking for the argument, the counter-proposal, the procedural angle. I did not yet understand that the people who had sent me that message were not interested in any of those things. Base 7 on Titan did not appear on any public map. The facility around it had a registered designation as a geological research station, which it may have been once. What it was now was something else entirely. A man named Owen Greer met me at the entrance. He was somewhere in his late 50s, with gray hair cut very short and the kind of steady, unhurried manner that people develop when they have spent a long time in environments where panic is the most dangerous thing in the room. He shook my hand, said my name once in confirmation, and then walked me inside without any further introduction. The corridor we walked through was long and lit with a pale white light. Doors lined both sides. Most of them were closed. Through one that was open, I saw a room full of people working at screens, moving quickly, communicating in the quiet, focused way of people who already knew what they were doing and had been doing it for some time. "How long has this existed?" I asked. "Since year 3 of council membership," Owen said. I stopped walking. Year 3. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 40 years ago. That meant this place, whatever it was, had existed for 37 years. Owen stopped too. He looked at me not unkindly. "They told us 40 years ago that they were letting us in," he said. "They did not tell us the conditions under which they could remove us. We found that out in year 2 when one of our translators working on the Archive Access Project came across Article 91 buried in a footnote of an 800-year-old procedural document." He paused. "We decided we should be ready, just in case." He started walking again. "Ready for what?" I asked, following him. He pushed open a door at the end of the corridor, and I walked through it. And I stopped asking that question, because the room on the other side answered it in a way that no words could have matched. The chamber was massive. It curved slightly at the edges, the way rooms do when they are built inside a structure designed to manage its own atmospheric pressure. Screens covered 3 of the 4 walls from floor to ceiling. At the center, a circular platform held a holographic display of the solar system, rendered in precise detail, with hundreds of tiny markers positioned throughout it like stars that had been carefully placed by hand. Each marker was a vessel. Not a research vessel, not a diplomatic transport. Each marker represented something built for an entirely different purpose. I stood there and looked at the scale of it. 3 fleets, one near Jupiter, one in the outer Oort cloud, one positioned at coordinates I recognized as being dangerously close to the Council's primary communication relay station. "We built these," I said. It was not a question. I was just saying it aloud so that my brain would accept it. "We built these," Owen confirmed. I turned to look at him. My voice was very controlled when I spoke, because I was a diplomat and control was what I had trained for. "The Council has been monitoring our shipbuilding capacity for 40 years. They have been monitoring what we showed them," Owen said simply. I turned back to the display. 37 years. For 37 years, while Earth played the role of the young, eager, slightly rough around the edges newcomer in the galactic community, while our ambassadors smiled and deferred and accepted the smaller seat at every table. While we signed the agreements and followed the protocols and were repeatedly reminded of our junior status in patient, slightly condescending tones, a group of very quiet, very disciplined people had been doing something else entirely. They had been preparing. The message on my device had said we were ready. I had not known what that meant. Standing in that room, looking at those markers, I finally understood. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the weight of it settle over me the way a heavy coat settles when you put it on in cold weather. It was a real weight, and it was not comfortable, and I knew that what came next was going to change everything. The only question left was what we were going to do with what we had built. Owen Greer pulled up a second display beside the first one. It showed a set of coordinates I recognized immediately. The Veth Dominion's Central Archive Station, the most important information repository in the known galaxy, 400 years old, the symbolic and strategic heart of the most powerful member of the Galactic Council. He looked at me steadily. "They gave us 30 days, he said. "We have a different proposal." I looked at the display, then I looked at him. "Tell me," I said. And he did. 3 weeks before the Council's 30-day deadline, every alarm on every Veth Dominion communications array went silent at exactly the same moment. It was not a malfunction. Malfunctions are random. They affect one system then another. They leave traces, error codes, residual signals that technicians can follow like threads. What happened to the Veth Dominion's arrays was not random. It was precise, surgical. It happened to all of them across 7 sectors within a window of 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I was on the command vessel, the third ship back in the formation we called the Pale Blue Line, when it happened. I was standing at the main communications console, watching the confirmation signals come in one by one. Each signal was a short code, green for success. There were no other colors on the board that morning. I had spent the 3 weeks between Owen Greer's briefing and this moment trying to understand exactly what I had agreed to be part of. Not in a moral sense only, though that was certainly part of it. In a practical sense. In a strategic sense. I am a diplomat. I needed to understand the shape of what we were doing, the way you need to understand the shape of an argument before you can make it effectively. What I had come to understand was this. The Galactic Council did not expect humanity to resist because they had never needed to expect it from us before. We had been compliant, curious, eager members for 4 decades, and before us, every species that had faced a similar ruling had accepted it. The Brenni people of the Outer Reach had accepted relocation. The Tolan Collective had accepted it. The Myerth had negotiated briefly and then accepted it. The Council's method worked because it had always worked. They issued the ruling. The species in question protested. Negotiations occurred. The ruling stood. Life moved on. They had built no model for what happened when the species in question said no, and meant it in a way that had teeth. The commander of our fleet was a man named Arthur Cole. He was 53 years old, with a calm face and a precise way of speaking that I had initially mistaken for coldness. It was not coldness. It was the particular clarity that comes from having thought through every possible outcome of a situation until you reach the point where clarity is the only thing left. He had been part of the Titan program for 21 years. He had planned this specific operation for 9 of them. First phase confirmed. A young officer named Peter Walsh said from the navigation station. Peter was 26. He had the look of someone running entirely on focus and the controlled energy of a person doing something they had trained for their whole career. Arthur Cole looked at me, ready for Phase 2. I nodded. I had a role in Phase 2 that had not been part of any original plan. Owen had suggested it. Arthur had agreed after a long pause. They needed a diplomat for what came next, not because they needed someone to negotiate, because they needed someone who could stand in front of the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy and not flinch. I asked Arthur once, in the week before we launched, whether he thought this would work. He had looked out at the star field beyond the viewport for a moment before answering. "I think it will work better than they expect," he said, "which is not the same as working the way we plan." That turned out to be the most accurate thing anyone said during the entire operation. The second phase was the approach to the Veth Dominion Central Archive Station. The station orbited a dim star at the edge of the Dominion's controlled space. It was old, as these things go. 400 years of existence had given it a certain monumental quality, the way ancient buildings on Earth develop a weight that newer ones do not have. It was not heavily armed. It did not need to be. For 4 centuries, no one had ever had a reason to approach it with anything other than a library card. The boarding teams were led by a woman named Carol Finch. Carol was 38, and she had the compact, efficient manner of someone who had learned very early in life that the best way to move through a difficult situation was to move quickly and quietly, and to leave as little disruption as possible in your wake. She was not a loud person. She was an extremely effective one. I watched the boarding on the secondary display. The teams made entry in less than 12 minutes. The station's crew, mostly archivists and system administrators with no combat training and no expectation that anyone would ever board their facility, offered no physical resistance. They were secured in a common area in the station's lower level. They were not harmed. Carol was very specific about that, and her teams followed it without exception. Then something happened that changed the entire shape of what we were doing. The plan had been to destroy the archives. One precise action, a statement. "We came here, we reached the thing you valued most, and we reduced it to particles." The message would be unmistakable. "You are not untouchable, neither are we." Carol Finch sent a transmission to the command vessel 17 minutes after boarding. Her voice was completely level. "Arthur," she said, "you need to see what is in here." What was in the archives was 400 years of the Galactic Council's actual history, not the official history, not the version distributed to member species in the welcome packets and the public databases. The real records, every negotiation, every internal decision, every ruling, every instance in which the law had been interpreted one way in public and another way in the rooms where no one was watching. It took Carol's team 40 minutes to copy the core index. The full archive would take longer than we had, but the index alone, the organizational structure of what was there, was enough to understand the scope of it. Arthur Cole looked at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. "We keep it," I said. That was not the plan. The plan was to send a message, I said. Destroying it sends a message. Keeping it sends a better one. He was quiet for a moment. In the background of the command room, systems hummed and personnel moved between stations with the focused, precise energy of people who were operating at the edge of what they had prepared for. Peter Walsh was tracking 3 separate Council fleet movements on his display. The Council's military response was slower than we had expected, but it was coming. "We have a limited window," Arthur said. "I know," I said. "Make the decision." He looked at the display for exactly 4 seconds. Then he looked at Peter Walsh. "Commence extraction protocols. Full data pull, maximum speed. We take everything we can in the time we have." He looked back at me. "Then we leave." We lost 2 ships in the withdrawal, the Carver and the Helm, 41 crew members. I had read every one of their files in the week before launch, the way you read the files of people you are responsible for. I knew their names. I knew where they were from. I knew which ones had families waiting. Standing at my station as the confirmation of their loss came through, I made myself hold that weight without putting it down. It would have been easier to set it aside, to process the larger picture, to focus on the strategic outcome. I did not let myself do that. Those 41 people had known what they were part of, and they had come anyway, and the least I could do was feel the full weight of what that cost. Arthur Cole stood at the center of the command room and received the news the same way he received everything, without flinching. But I watched his jaw tighten for one brief moment, the only outward sign that he was carrying the same weight I was. Then he nodded to the communications officer. "Open the channel," he said. "All frequencies council-wide." He looked at me. This was my part. I had thought about what I was going to say for 3 weeks. I had written drafts. I had revised them. In the end, I had set all of them aside and decided to say what was true, plainly, in the simplest words I could find. I stepped forward to the communications point. The light came on, indicating active broadcast. I looked directly into it. "This is Claire Lawson speaking on behalf of the people of Earth," I said. "We have the archives, we have the records, we are still here, we are not leaving, and we would like to talk. Your response can reach us on this frequency. We will be waiting." I stepped back. The channel stayed open. For 42 seconds, there was silence. Then the response line lit up. The council sent junior delegates first. This was not surprising. It was, in fact, the most predictable thing they could have done. When a powerful body is caught off balance and needs time to regroup, it sends the least important people it has available. Junior delegates can be recalled. Their words carry no binding weight. They are, in diplomatic terms, a way of being present in a conversation without actually being in it. I had used the same tactic myself on 3 separate occasions during my career, and I recognized it immediately. I also recognized what it required in response. The junior delegation arrived at the neutral meeting point we had designated, a mid-space platform used by independent traders on the edge of Veth Dominion territory, 48 hours after our initial broadcast. There were 5 of them. They were courteous in the careful, formal way of people who have been given very specific instructions about what not to say. I met them in the platform's main conference room with Owen Greer and a legal advisor named Nora Platt, who knew the Galactic Charter better than anyone I had ever worked with. Nora was 44, quiet, and had the kind of memory that could locate a specific clause in an 800-page document in the time it took most people to open the index. The lead junior delegate, a Veth representative named Arvaz, opened by expressing the Council's deep concern regarding Earth's recent actions. He used the word concern 4 times in the first 2 minutes. He did not use the word negotiation. He did not use the word agreement. He spoke in the slow, measured cadence of someone reading from a prepared statement while being careful to sound like they were not. I let him finish. I let the silence after his statement sit for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you. We would like to speak with the permanent chair." Arvaz blinked. The permanent chair does not attend preliminary sessions. "This is not a preliminary session," I said. "This is the session. If the permanent chair would prefer to make that decision after we release the first batch of archive records to the public information networks, that is also an option." Arvaz looked at his colleagues. One of them touched a small device on the table in front of him. There was a pause of about 90 seconds, during which nobody in the room said anything. Then Arvaz said, "The permanent chair will attend within the hour." The permanent chair was a title, not a person. It referred to the 7 senior-most representatives of the founding council species, who together formed the highest governing authority in the known galaxy. In 40 years of Earth's council membership, no human being had ever been in the same room as the full permanent chair under anything other than ceremonial circumstances. They arrived in 53 minutes, 7 figures, each accompanied by a smaller delegation of advisors. The room, which had been comfortably sized for a preliminary session, became very full very quickly. I stood as they entered as protocol required. Owen stood. Nora stood. Then we all sat down again, and I looked across the table at the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy, and I thought about the photograph in my coat pocket. A small printed image of Earth from space, carried everywhere by my grandmother, passed down to my mother, passed down to me. I had brought it with me without quite knowing why. The chair of the permanent chair, a Veth named Counselor Dav, spoke first. His voice was the voice I associated with every condescending exchange Earth had ever had with the Council. Smooth, patient, faintly amused, like a person speaking to someone who is not quite following the conversation. "You have placed yourselves in an extremely serious position," he said. "We were already in an extremely serious position," I said. "You placed us there 22 days ago when you issued a relocation order for our entire species. That order was issued under full legal authority. Under Article 91, subsection 14, yes," Nora said. She did not look up from the document she was reviewing. "Written in the 3rd century of the Common Calendar, before Earth was known to exist, and last reviewed 412 years ago. It is our position that the article as written cannot legally apply to a member species, because membership in the Council was not a condition that existed when the article was drafted. We have a full brief prepared." She set a copy of the brief on the table. It was 340 pages long. We had prepared it in the 2 weeks before the operation, in the event that we reached this table at all. Counselor Dav looked at the brief. He did not pick it up. "The legal question is a matter for the full Council to review." "We agree," I said. "While that review is ongoing, we would like to propose a temporary arrangement. Earth's sovereignty remains intact. The relocation order is suspended. We begin structured discussions on the mineral rights question, with binding arbitration by a panel that includes non-Veth members. We have some specific nominees." There was a shift in the room. I had spent enough time at negotiating tables to feel when a room changes temperature, and this one did. One of the permanent chair members, a representative of the Selva people named Counselor Ori, leaned slightly forward. The Selva were one of the older founding species, historically quiet in council proceedings, rarely at odds with the Veth Dominion but never entirely aligned with them either. "Your legal argument has merit," Counselor Ori said. Counselor Dav did not look at Counselor Ori when the Selva representative spoke, but his jaw moved in the way of a person choosing not to respond to something. I filed that away. Then came the Veth Dominion's countermove. I had expected something. What I had not predicted was the specific form it took. An aide to Counselor Dav produced a document and passed it to the room's public display. On the screen appeared an internal Earth communication, dated 6 years earlier, showing that Earth's government had received a preliminary intelligence report on the Veth Dominion's mineral survey plan and had not disclosed it to the Council. "Earth had knowledge of the survey findings," Counselor Dav said. "Earth chose not to raise the matter through proper channels. This calls into question the good faith of your government's participation in Council proceedings for the past 6 years." I looked at the document. I had known it existed. I had been one of the people briefed on the original intelligence report 6 years ago, when we had received it, and then watched the decision get made at a level above mine to hold it quietly and wait to see what developed. What I had learned from being at many difficult tables was that the moment to act on a countermove is not after you have had time to think about it. The moment to act is the moment it lands, before the other side has finished feeling the effect of it. "You are correct," I said. "Earth received that intelligence 6 years ago and did not disclose it. Would you like to know why?" Counselor Dav did not answer, which was itself an answer. "Because at that time," I said, "we had no mechanism to raise it that we believed would result in a fair hearing. We were a junior member with a track record of being dismissed in formal proceedings. We made the calculation that disclosure would be noted, filed, and used against us at a later date. We were likely correct in that calculation. The environment that made us feel that way is precisely what we are here to change." I paused and looked around the table. "We are not here because we want an adversarial relationship with the Council. We are here because the relationship we had was not one we could accept continuing. We would like something different, something that is actually fair." The room was quiet. Then Counselor Ori spoke again. "What specifically are you proposing?" What came out of the next 6 hours of conversation was not a final agreement. It was the framework of one. The relocation order was suspended pending legal review. Arbitration on the mineral rights was agreed to in principle with a mixed panel. The archives question, what happened to the records we held, was set aside for a separate process, which Nora had anticipated and which we had a position prepared for. And then something happened that none of us had planned for. A message arrived at the platform from 2 different council member species simultaneously. The Breni, who had accepted their own relocation order 30 years ago and had lived in their reserve zones ever since, sent a formal statement expressing support for Earth's legal position. The Myerth sent a similar statement, adding a request for a review of their own historical case. Then a third message arrived, and a fourth. By the time we recessed for the evening, 7 smaller council member species had formally aligned themselves with Earth's position, not just on the mineral rights question, on the broader question of how the founding charter was interpreted and applied to junior members. Owen Greer found me in a side room during the recess. He looked at the messages on his device. He looked at me. "Did you plan this?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. He was quiet for a moment. 37 years of preparation, he said, and the thing that actually breaks the dam is a conversation. The preparation made the conversation possible, I said. Without what we built, we were never getting to this table. He thought about that. Then he nodded slowly, with the careful nod of someone who is accepting a complicated truth. I went to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere in that darkness, 41 crew members were not coming home. Somewhere further out, Earth was still turning. Cities were still lit. People were going about their days without knowing yet that the shape of everything was in the process of changing. I reached into my coat pocket and held the photograph without taking it out. A small, worn square of paper, blue and white against black. We were not done, not even close, but for the first time in 40 years, we were at the actual table. I came home on a Tuesday. The shuttle from the transit hub touched down at the Geneva facility at just after 7 in the morning, and the first thing I noticed when I stepped outside was how quiet it was. There was a low gray sky, the kind that holds light rather than gives it. The air was cold, the kind of clean, sharp cold that does not feel like anything except exactly what it is. There was no reception. I had requested that specifically. I did not want cameras or statements or official welcomes. I needed a few hours to be a person before I was a representative of anything. I took a ground car to my flat. I sat in the back and looked out the window at the city moving past, people at bus stops, a man walking a dog on a long leash, a group of schoolchildren in bright coats crossing a street in a messy line that their teacher was trying without much success to straighten, traffic lights changing, a bakery with its lights on and its door propped open, releasing a thin stream of warm air onto the pavement. All of it so ordinary, all of it still here. I had known, intellectually, that this was what we had been fighting for. But there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and feeling it in the back of a ground car on a quiet Tuesday morning. Seeing the bakery and the schoolchildren and the man with his dog, and understanding that 37 years of quiet, patient, disciplined work in a facility on Titan had been aimed at preserving exactly this kind of Tuesday, this kind of ordinary, this kind of nothing remarkable, and that it had worked, at least for now, was a different kind of knowing. I sat with it all the way to my flat. My mother lived 20 minutes from me, in a small house with a garden she had been working on for 15 years. I called her from the car. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did, as if she had been expecting the call. "You are back," she said. "I am back. Are you all right?" I thought about that question honestly. The way you can only think about certain questions when you are tired enough that the usual defenses are not quite in place. I think so, I said. I'm not sure yet. Come for breakfast, she said. I will come this afternoon, I said. I need a few hours first. She accepted that without pressing, which was one of the things I had always loved about her. She understood that some things needed to settle before they could be talked about. At my flat, I changed my clothes and made coffee and sat at the table by the window for a while without doing anything, just sitting. The coffee got cold. I did not mind. I thought about the 41 crew members from the Carver and the Helm. I had been given the official list before I left the neutral platform, 41 names. I had read through it 3 times on the return journey, letting each name be a real person, rather than a number in a report. A man named Dennis Farrow, who had been an engineer from a small town in the north of England. A woman named Lucy Strand, originally from Auckland, who had been a navigation specialist. A man named Callum Bright, who had been 24 years old and who had, according to his file, been accepted to a graduate program in astrophysics that he had deferred to join the Titan program. 24 years old. He had deferred graduate school to do this. I sat at the table and let that be real. This is something I think people who are not in these situations sometimes misunderstand about those who are. The grief and the conviction can exist in the same space. You do not have to choose between believing that what you did was necessary and carrying the weight of what it cost. Those two things are not opposites. They are both true, and you hold them both, and you do not let one cancel out the other. That is not strength exactly. It is just honesty. I eventually got up and went to my mother's house. She made eggs and toast and sat across from me at her kitchen table while I ate and did not make me explain anything until I was ready. Then I told her in broad strokes what had happened, not the classified details, just the shape of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," I said. "It is beginning. The legal review of Article 91 will take months. The arbitration on the mineral rights will take longer. The process of building something different out of the framework we have cracked open will take years. But Earth is safe. For now," I said. "The relocation order is suspended. That is not the same as revoked. We still have work to do." She nodded. She looked out the window at her garden. A gray morning, but the plants did not seem to mind. "Your grandmother would have understood all of this better than me," she said. "She always said that the thing about being underestimated was that you had to decide what you were going to do with it. Either it broke you or you used it." I thought about the photograph in my coat pocket. I had placed it carefully on my desk when I changed clothes. It was sitting there now, a small worn square of paper, blue and white against black. "She was right," I said. 3 days later, I attended the memorial for the crew of the Carver and the Helm. It was held at the Geneva facility, in a large open space that had been cleared for the occasion. There were family members, colleagues, a few officials. No cameras were permitted. That had been the request of the families, and it was honored without question. I stood in the front row to the left. Arthur Cole stood to my right. We did not speak to each other. There was nothing to say that the occasion had not already said. A man named Simon Farrow, the brother of Dennis Farrow, read a short statement that he had written himself. He did not talk about the mission or its significance. He talked about his brother, about the particular laugh Dennis had, about the way he used to call at odd hours just to share something he had read or heard that he thought was interesting, about the way he took things seriously without becoming heavy, which was apparently a quality that ran in the family. When Simon Farrow finished reading, he folded the paper and put it in his pocket and looked at the names on the memorial board without any expression that I could read. The way a person looks at something so real and so permanent that expression runs out. I carried every one of those 41 names with me out of that memorial and have carried them since. The weeks that followed were unlike any period in my career. The work was dense and complicated and moved on multiple tracks simultaneously. The legal review panel assembled to examine Article 91 included 3 scholars who had spent their careers working on council charter law and who, in quiet and careful language, made clear in their first preliminary finding that the article's application to member species was, at minimum, legally contestable. That finding alone was enough to keep the relocation order suspended indefinitely, while the full review continued. The arbitration panel on the mineral rights question convened its first session on a neutral station 11 days after the Geneva Memorial. The human delegation, led by Nora Platt, arrived with a team of economists, geologists, and trade specialists who had been preparing their position for the better part of a year. The Veth Dominion's delegation arrived expecting a relatively short process. By the end of the first week, it was clear the process was going to take considerably longer than they had anticipated. Nora had that effect on rooms. The Pale Blue Compact, as people had begun calling the informal alignment of smaller council species that had formed around Earth's legal position, held its first formal meeting 2 weeks after the neutral platform negotiations. 7 species, some of whom had never been in the same room as each other before. Representatives from the Brenni, who had spent 30 years in their reserve zones and who brought with them a quiet, settled intensity that I found deeply affecting. Representatives from the Myerth, who were already preparing a formal petition to have their own historical relocation case reviewed. Representatives from the Selva, who had been part of the permanent chair and whose involvement was the most significant single development in the political reordering of the council since its founding. I attended that meeting in a capacity that had not existed before, not as a junior liaison, not as a member of a minor species asking for patience, as a representative of a group that other groups were choosing to stand beside. It was a different feeling. I will not pretend it was not. But the feeling I carry most from that period is not the one from the big moments. It is from a small one. About a month after I returned home, I was called to attend the first formal session of the expanded council, in which Earth's new status within the body was to be officially recognized. The permanent seat, which had been offered and accepted in principle during the negotiations, was to be formally confirmed. I flew out to the council station alone. No delegation this time, just me and Nora's briefing documents and the photograph in my coat pocket. The council chamber was exactly as I had seen it in recordings many times before. A vast circular room, designed to hold all member species and their delegates simultaneously. The acoustics made every voice clear regardless of where it originated. The architecture was old and deliberate in the way of things built to communicate permanence. I was shown to the seat that had been designated for Earth. It was not at the outer edge of the chamber where the minor member species sat. It was at the main table, 7 seats around the inner ring. One of them, for the first time in council history, carried Earth's marker. I sat down. The room was full, species I recognized and some I did not. The representatives of the Selva, who gave me a small, precise nod as I settled. The Veth Dominion's delegation, who did not look in my direction. The Brenni representative, an older woman named Kara, who caught my eye from across the room and held it for a moment with an expression that I understood without words, the look of someone who has waited a long time for something and who is watching it begin. When the session opened and the arbiter's system called the room to order, I placed one item on the table in front of me. A small worn photograph, printed on paper, blue and white against black. None of the other delegates knew what it was. A few glanced at it. No one asked. I did not explain. My grandmother had kept it because, she said, on the days when the world seemed too large and too indifferent and too impossible to do anything about, it helped to look at it and remember that all of it, everything worth caring about, was right there in that small blue circle, and that small blue circles had a way of surviving against much larger odds than anyone expected. I had not fully understood that when I was young. I understood it now. The session opened. Business was called. For the first time, a human voice at the main table said present when Earth's name was called. Mine. We had a long way still to go. The legal review would take time. The arbitration would take time. The work of building something genuinely different out of a structure designed to keep certain species small would take more time than any of us would be alive to see completed. Change in large systems does not come quickly. It comes in layers, each one making the next one possible. But we were here. We were at the table, and nobody had put us here except ourselves. I thought about the general's words from the early briefings, the ones that had stayed with me through everything that followed. He had been talking about why the Titan program had been kept secret, why the people who built it had spent 37 years in the dark, building and waiting, and holding the possibility of this moment without any guarantee it would ever come. He had said that hope, when it is real, is not a passive thing. It is not sitting and wishing. It is the daily decision to keep working towards something you cannot yet see, even when the evidence suggests the odds are not in your favor. I had not fully agreed with him at the time. I was a diplomat. I believed in conversation and process and the gradual movement of positions towards something mutually acceptable. I still believed in those things. But sitting at that table, with 41 names I carried, and a photograph of the world we had fought for, and a room full of the most powerful governing figures in the known galaxy who had once assumed we would simply do as we were told, I understood what he had meant. Hope is just rage that learned to be patient. We had been patient for a very long time. Now we were something else. The session continued. The galaxy turned. And Earth, small and blue and improbable and absolutely determined to remain exactly where it was, held its place at the table. It did not let go. It never would.